All right, and welcome to the Modern Job Hunt. This is a podcast that I've been putting on for the last year. I've been interviewing experts in the product, job hunting, career intersection. And today I have Rich Mironov on the show. So we'll be covering the gap between individual contributor and director or management. So the episode is all about that. Rich has been leading software product management teams for nearly 40 years, including at six startups, 15 interim CPO and VP roles. In that time, he's interviewed thousands of product candidates and helped more than a dozen clients find the product leader they need. So, welcome, Rich.
Thank you.
Um, so today is an episode that's very interesting to me. Before we started recording, we were talking about how I've been in a senior role for maybe about 4 or 5 years now, and that jump to director is something that I'm personally interested. I'm also a job seeker at the same time. So this whole series concept was related to how do I find my next thing after experiencing a tech layoff. And yeah, I'll just do one last thing before we get rolling, which is show updates. So, as a product person, I'm always tweaking and testing different things. So, for folks approach me that they like to listen on the go. So, I have added Apple Music or Apple Podcasts and Amazon Music as potential areas where you can listen to this after the show. I'll be getting this episode up after I kind of catch up to some of my prior episodes. And it's still on Spotify and YouTube. I've also moved the mic closer. So if anyone who has been listening in thinks my sound is a little bit better week over week or episode over episode, then hopefully that helped a little bit. And with that said, we will kind of jump into it with Rich.
Excellent.
Yeah, Rich. So first of all, I know I did a little bit of an intro there, but can you tell us a bit about yourself, kind of how you've transitioned personally from an individual contributor to a leader, how you view it having such an extensive career in the technology sector, leadership over 40 years. Maybe it's changed, maybe it's exactly the same. Like, what is your kind of personal views on these things?
Sure. So I guess I'd start by saying I had my first product management job at a technology company in the 1980s. So in almost every company I run into, there's some story that says, well, product management didn't exist until, and they insert a year in the 90s or aughts or 2010s or whenever somebody at that company discovered product management. It's not new. So I was at Tandem Computers in the late 80s as a product manager. I actually got bumped up to a group product manager just sort of by, there was a vacuum there. What I'd say is what I was doing in the 80s was mostly what looks like product owner work. So very inward facing, reporting to engineering, following the specs, getting things launched, but very little external view of what the world and the market needs. I had a chance to move to a company called Sybase in the early 90s, in the early days of the database wars, where I had my first director job that was really a director. And it was end to end, right? So not just getting things shipped, but what does the market need? What's our strategy? Do we end of life things? How do we allocate our energy? For me, that's the essence of end to end product management. And in my case, I became a director there and hired a team of 4 or 5 product managers under me. Um, what I'd say I think about the major difference here is as you move up into the director and up roles, you actually do less and less product management and more organizational work, people work, hiring, uh, staffing, and a tremendous amount of politicking and merchandising of what we do to the rest of the company. So that move isn't just up; it's rather a different job. So if you love the details of doing product management and having a product that you love and own and care for and nurture over the years the way we care for our children, if that's the most important thing to you, moving up into the director job or the group product manager job or up, you're going to have less of the doing of the thing you love. So it would be great if you love the job you're moving into as well. So a lot more organizational work, a lot more collaboration with other departments, worrying about how things operate in your organization much more than roadmaps and shipments.
And one of the things that I think is difficult as someone that's always been an individual contributor is how do you actually prove that you can do the next job when it's totally different from the job that you do today.
Yeah, and I don't know, I'm sure it's totally different, but I'd say it's 40% different, right? Um, and so there's a set of things that you would be doing as a director that you don't do as an IC that you have to look for opportunities for. So if there's a cross-functional task force on something, even if you detest that, right? A lot of director work is that kind of stuff. So you're going to raise your hand and you say, okay, I'll be on that team or group. Um, Things directors do, they don't love just one product, they love their whole portfolio. So as an individual contributor, how do I think about and support the other products or pieces of product in the portfolio, not just mine? The other thing, probably most important, is as we move up in the organization, um, we start to change our language because the go-to-market side of our companies actually don't care how anything's built, and they don't care what product managers do, and they're uninterested in our 5-hour explanations of Scrum or backlogs or discovery or any of those things. What they really want to know is it going to make money? Who's it for? And what are the very high level benefits or messages that attach to that, rather than the detail work? So as we move up, our language changes to the language of money and the language of go to market and the language of executives, which is very different from the way we talk with our engineers and designers.
I think on one of the earlier episodes, I talked about the Airbnb announcement and how media misconstrued a certain amount of that, but
Most of it.
how the core message around marketing and value props and everything, it was always part of product. And I think that just highlighted the importance of it and how marketing is a core part of this job.
That's right. And of course, if you're at a company with a great marketing department or organization, they're doing most of the marketing, but you can't market a product unless you're really clear about very crisp benefit statements, very clear target audience, who's it for, who's it not for, why is it going to be valuable enough that they're going to give us money. Those are all discussions that are much more product marketing than they are inward looking product management. And if we as product folks aren't delivering the goods here on why it matters, who's it for, why are they going to pay for it, then either our product doesn't sell or some other group has to lean in and do our job for us. Um, and and an observation here: if as a product person you came up probably first on the engineering side, like many of us did, and then really heads down on product, this is a big shift, right? You have to really change the way you think about your audience and your messaging and the things that come out of your mouth, because your audience here is very different from your engineers and designers. And so I talk about being bilingual. You have to speak enough engineering and design that your team doesn't, forbid you from coming to the stand-ups and lock you in the closet and laugh at you in public. But you have to speak enough money and benefits and customers and deals and money and money and money that the rest of the organization, which really doesn't care about the internal development cycle, understands how we add value and why we're shipping useful stuff.
I mean, one of the skills that I personally have been working on in the last little bit is reading books about negotiation and listening about negotiation. And I
Sure.
think that like earlier in my product career, it's a lot more strategy is passed down to you, but then as you develop and so when you're working with leaders, how much is it negotiation? How much is it understanding motivation? And how does that increase in importance as someone kind of increases their career's scope?
Absolutely. Every step you take up the organization, that becomes more important. And there's this fallacy I think a lot of us bring, and I dropped it into the LinkedIn chat you had, which is the idea that I'm smarter than everyone else, and my spreadsheet or backlog or algorithm or whatever it is I'm doing to choose which things go in the roadmap are right because I'm smart and I did my research. I've never in my career found a sales or marketing or implementation person who bought that story, right? The I'm going to stand up in front of you and show you my 7-column spreadsheet with all these weightings, which show you why you're not getting the things you want, right? Just isn't a sale, right? And if I back off, because negotiating kind of implies equal partners here, right? And a lot of organizations, particularly ones that are not in the software business, but are building technology for some other business, their banks, their airlines, their government agencies. The technology group is seen as a service bureau and a cost center, right? And has no political clout, has no real ability to say, we're not building that because it's a mistake or it's not useful, or these other things are more important. If your product organization doesn't have the ability to say no in very definitive terms to your stakeholders, then you can't negotiate, right? I've done a bunch of audits with many of my clients where we ask the question, what's the ratio of requests to capacity? Right? And everybody says, oh, if we just had 10% more engineers, we'd get everything done. When I actually look at the numbers and we pull the list, what we find is that when we add up all of the things that all of our stakeholders are asking for, it's usually 25 times capacity or 40 times capacity, which means, if you do the math, that we're going to have to say no to 95% of all of the requests that come in. We're never going to do them. We're never going to get to the bottom of the backlog. The small things are going to get lost. If we don't have 50 customers asking for it, it ain't going to get done. And that assumption means that the people at the top of the product organization have to be equal partners at the table to say, all right, we've all agreed there's company strategy, there's product strategy. Here's the 6 or 4 things that are most important. And every time some other stakeholder comes to me with a new idea that they thought of in the shower or something that came off a customer call, if it's not worth as much as the things we've agreed are our core product strategy, we're going to say no. And that makes everyone uncomfortable and unhappy. I've never met a marketing or a sales stakeholder at a B2B enterprise company that thought they were getting enough. And every time I have that discussion, I hear from sales and marketing that we just want engineering to be more productive and get more done, as if we were just 10% short. Right? But the reality is most of the requests we get don't make sense. Most of the requests we get aren't well thought out, aren't going to lead to business outcomes, or are conflicting in some way. And so the reason politics and people are so important as you move up the organization is because my general case is that all of our stakeholders are unhappy. And every one of our stakeholders could consume more than all of the engineering capacity we had by themselves for their department. And so we are always going to be negotiating from a positioning of, here's the 4 things we're going to get done that support the strategy. And here's the 85 things which I love, but we're going to leave by the side of the road.
And in your 40 years, have you noticed any change in that? Like I have 100% noticed that in organizations that have older and legacy mentality, that IT services thing, like I tell you, you execute is super common. In more startups where the product is the core, then it's a little different. But I'm curious, over your 40 years, are you
Yeah,
seeing more equal conversations?
I would slice it a different way. What I'd say is, if you're a company that's actually in the software business, and the thing you do is you make software bits and you sell them for money, it's much easier to align because the product is the company, right? And so we have better discussions. If you're in some organization that considers technology to be a cost center, I've seen no movement in the last 40 years, right? That the folks making decisions aren't interested in anything but time and materials and cost and delivery dates. And there's a post, I'll get you the link later. I have a really long set of thoughts about what I call product waste, and I'm going to differentiate it from engineering waste. Okay, engineering waste is it's late, or it doesn't work, or the design's not good, or it's got bugs, right? Product waste is we built exactly what our stakeholders asked or demanded that we build, and it didn't move the business needle, and it didn't make our customers happier, and it didn't deliver revenue, and it didn't achieve anything. And what I see in organizations that treat, by the way, IT is what you call it when it's a cost center, and engineering is what you call it when it's a profit center, right? So in the IT mentality of a bunch of folks who believe that this is just typing, right? Here's the ticket, do what I tell you to do. My audit suggests that something between 50 and 70% of everything we build is delivered on time and is complete product waste because it doesn't move the business needle, right? And the idea that what we're talking about is throughput is, in my view, fundamentally wrong. What we're talking about is value. And value is about customers using our stuff and paying us for it, not about which day we delivered it. So in the IT space, as soon as you call it IT, I give up and pack my bags and go home, right? And then in the technology space, what I see is B2C consumer stuff is much further ahead than B2B enterprise. And the reason for that is that if you're doing a streaming music service, you're doing a game, you're doing something else where you need 50 million users at €8 a month, right? Turns out no one of those users is so important that they have the phone number of your CEO and can call up and complain, right? You're dealing in mass numbers, you're dealing in large groups. And so product and marketing are aligned because we're trying to make the game or the streaming service better for hundreds of thousands of people. If you switch that to the enterprise space where we've got to bring in $3 million this quarter and there's 4 deals worth $500,000 each, which are the anchor for this quarter. And every board member knows the names of those deals. And the CEO is helping close those deals. And there's some late arriving request from that customer that says, hey, we'd love to sign, but we just realized that we need you to add teleportation to the product by Friday, right? The pressure to say yes to whatever request that large customer comes up with is so intense, because if we don't close that deal, we're going to have to fire people. Right? And every board of directors member knows the names of all the important deals and is calling the CEO every week to ask how we're doing. And there's a bunch of fussy product and engineering people getting in the way. Right? So in the enterprise space, it's really easy to be sales led, which never leads to good product and always leads to specials and one-offs and problems and integrations we didn't think of, and blows up the roadmap every quarter. So in the enterprise space where I live, this is for me the essential problem, that we agreed on the strategy at the beginning of the quarter, but somebody just got off the phone with JP Morgan Chase or whoever it is who has a new request and they're holding up the deal, and the intense pressure goes right to the CEO and then back to the product team to try to say no.
So I want to circle back on your product waste comment, because
Yes.
I've often heard, you get into these collaborations, you do 5 of these requests, you might get 2 or 3 of your own. Then the quarter ends and someone comes to you and say, "What did you do this quarter?" And
Yep.
like, "Where's your results? Where's your ROI for your whole team or whole unit?" Um, I've never seen that same person say, "Well, you did 5 for me and 2 for you. So your ROI is not good, but like it was kind of my fault." Like, how do you coach your leaders on that dilemma
Yeah.
where we all want to be collaborative, but at the end of the quarter, it's very rarely like, "Oh, we contributed to the lack of
Right.
ROI."
And if we got to the end of quarter and we didn't figure out where the ROI was coming from, then we've got a product management failure. We've got product management malpractice here, right? So let's adopt the modern technology, the modern phrase of OKRs or KPIs or whatever metrics you've got, right? So the right way I think to think about this is we collaborate on generating lots of ideas with every smart person in the company because they're smart, right? But we evaluate them not on did they come from a particular stakeholder, but what's our back of the envelope assessment of which of these are actually going to move the metric, the OKR, right? And then we're going to measure before and after, right? So, again, let's imagine we're in some business and it's consumer business, there's a lot of churn and people aren't renewing at the end of their year. Okay. We're going to get the smart people together. We're going to talk about churn. We're going to have 15 theories for why folks are churning. By the way, the next step is to go out and interview 25 or 50 of them and find out whether our theories are any good, right? And then let's imagine one of the big blockers is that our renewal page is complicated and people can't get through it and they're abandoning it, right? I'm making this up, right? So now we can put 15 ideas on the board for different ways to improve the renewal process. Are there links? Are there emails? Is it SMS? Do we keep their credit card? I could imagine all kinds of things. And we're going to look at those and we're going to force rank them based on which ones we believe are going to lead to the highest improvement in churn. And we're going to phrase it as, well, we're losing, 11% per month current churn. These 3 are the ones that we as a group agree are going to maybe get us from 11 to 9.5% churn. And that's worth $50 million to the company, right? Um, and we're wrong on one of the three. That's okay. But we do some experiments, we try it. And what we talk about is not, I worked hard. Honestly, nobody cares if we worked hard, and it's invisible anyway, right? What we talk about is, here's the 4 things we did to improve churn. Here's the 2 that worked, and we improved churn by 3% here, and that's worth $27 million. Here's 2 that didn't work, and we'll own the fact, or we'll figure out why they didn't work, and we'll try new things. And so there's this endless stream of new ideas and projects and fixes for improving churn. And the people on the other side of the desk need to value churn more than their own opinions. Right? So we don't say you're stupid. We don't say I'm smarter and I'm better and I have better tools. What we say is, this is our best assessment for what's going to lead to business results. And do we agree? And when you bring me a new idea out of sequence, we're going to collectively decide whether it's such a great idea, it's so much better than everything else we thought of, that we're going to do it next, or it goes in the queue for next quarter's discussion, right? Notice what we're doing there is, we're not bringing personality forward, we're bringing results and outcomes forward. There's a brilliant book by Josh Seiden. It's really skinny, called Outcomes versus Output. Everybody should read it. And it's about asking the question, what's going to be different for our end users or our financials if we do this? Not which stakeholder am I satisfying?
And for the folks listening live, you can comment, and Rich and I will try to answer some of your questions. But one of the things that I wanted to ask you, having 40 years of experience in the technology sector, you've seen, this is probably what, your third, fourth down cycle that we're in right now. We're recording in February 2024, and
Fourth or
maybe
fifth.
more, fourth or fifth. I feel like whenever the fires get hot enough, the process and the camaraderie kind of goes out the window sometimes. Like, do you find that this is a hard time to be a leader in product in a down cycle like we're in today? And is it any different from the past?
I think it is harder to be a leader in a down cycle, because there's not much slack in the original sense, not the app sense. Budgets are tight. People are looking to cut heads, or maybe you've been given a 10% reduction number and you got to let a bunch of good people go. It's really hard. If you're coming at this and you don't have the trust of the rest of the company that what we're doing delivers results to the company, then you're lost. I think the moment to decide that you want to talk about business is not when the downturns arrived, right? It's Confucius, right? The best time to have planted a tree is 100 years ago. The second best time is now, right? We as leaders have to be building trust and understanding every single day with our peers, up market, down market, good, bad, because otherwise we're making bad decisions, or we lack trust around the table. What I would say is, there's a lot of really, really good people I know who are out on the street right now at every level. And so it's way harder to get promoted, or even more, way harder to join another company and get promoted at the same time than it is in good times. Right? I know 20 or 30 really good chief product officers who are between right now, who I think are brilliant and are having trouble landing the next thing. And if I were hiring from the outside at any level, I always want to hire somebody who's done this job before, because they have to learn the company, they have to learn the product, they have to learn the politics, they have to figure out all these things about how weird we are and how we do work. But at least they've done the job I'm hiring them for. The idea that I'm going to go outside and hire an IC and promote them to director and bring them into my company, I think is pretty low odds. So regardless of good times or bad times, it's generally easier to move up the chain, up the ladder in your own company, because you've got a lot of assets. You know the people, you know the tech, you know what's working, relationships with people inside and outside. So if there's an opportunity, if you have the chance to move up in your company, that's going to be easier and faster and doesn't put you unemployed for a while. But companies are shrinking, that's not going to be around for a while.
And you mentioned the relationships there. I think that this is one thing that it took me actually probably years in product to realize, why did nobody ever bring this up? I mean, it is in some of the books and literature, but I felt like you go do an introductory product work. It's like, this is balsamic, this is,
Right.
wireframing. And it's like, there should almost be a whole module or two on like, okay, this is a people job. It's not a technical job.
That's right. I think it's a half technical job. And yes, you have to, if you're using user stories, you have to know how to write them. And if you're putting them into Jira, you have to know how to put them in. But the idea that this is a cut and paste job where what you're doing is feeding the beast and turning the wheel and running the process, I think that's 40% of the job. Right? 60% of the job is some combination of really being out in the world and talking with your customers endlessly all the time to figure out what's really working and what they need, and first person opinions, not just what our sales and marketing folks told us, not what Gartner told us, and working the organization so that we can actually get the things done that need to be done with good cheer, with good relationships, with smart people getting themselves heard, right? It's at least half a people job. And if you approach it with a sort of engineering mindset that says, my spreadsheet beats your spreadsheet, you're never going to move ahead.
And when you're coaching these enterprise level CPOs and whatnot, like product has a lot of hats that we wear. Do they work more hours than their peers in other areas, or it seems like it's the hardest, one of the hardest jobs in an enterprise?
Um, they work really hard. Uh, you know the Dunning-Kruger effect? Okay. It says that the less I know about your job, the easier your job is. Right. I know that the sales leadership at my company work really, really hard and often on the weekends. I know my marketing leaders work really hard often on the weekends. I know my engineering leaders work all weekend and they love it. That's okay. Right. I don't know that I can say that our job is any harder. What I can say is it's the one I've lived through. Right. And so rather than say we're more important or better or hardworking, what I'd say is the other peers that we have at the company do really important things that we're less involved with and maybe don't care so much about. But they're good people. They work hard. Most of them are smart. They're looking out for the company. I would turn that another way. I would say the most important question is, what's the incentive structure that we put in place for each of these jobs? A good example in the enterprise space. And we see this endlessly. If the sales team gets the same commission for whatever we sell, for instance, one-off professional services and custom work, right? As for the product that we built, it turns out to be easier to sell custom work than the product we built. And so if we pay our sales team that way, they're all going to bring in all kinds of special contracts for one-off things that we're going to end up putting engineering on instead of our jobs, right? So when you look at sales and say, I hate them because they keep selling things that aren't on the price list, I don't think of it because they're bad people or bad salespeople. It's because we've written the wrong compensation plan. And so I go to the head of sales and the CEO and the CFO and I say, we're going to make a tiny change to the comp plan, and no one gets paid for selling anything except what we actually have and ship. And in about 2 seconds, our sales reps stop selling things they don't get paid for. Right. And that understanding of how every department works and how they're rewarded and what they do is essential to being, I think, in the product leader job, because we don't want to accuse our salespeople of being dumb or anti-product. What we want to do is understand how they behave and why they behave. And we want to work the system or the organization so that people are doing the right thing.
So we have a question from the chat here
Huh?
from John. So do you think a lighter management structure above IC is a more permanent state in product now? And perhaps you can comment on like, have the levels kind of increased and decreased like continuously over time? Is it like,
So I think that's fundamentally wrong. So what I've seen over the years is there's a pendulum effect here, right? So for at some point in time, and maybe it's because Airbnb put out a memo, or because the formerly known as Twitter folks fired 80% of their people, there's this idea that we don't need management layers. And so for the next, last year and this year and maybe into next year, we're going to be chopping management layers. And at the end of that, we're going to finally figure out what it was those management layers did that was so useful. and the pendulum's going to come back, and we're going to rehire management layers. So the way I frame this is different. I would say managing product managers is really hard. It's tough. And if you have more than 5 or 6 product managers working for you as a director or a whatever, you probably aren't serving them well. So if you have 3, then I think we have too many management layers. And if you have 9, on average, I think we don't have enough management layers. And at every layer, we're going to say, okay, well, if you're a VP, how many directors work for you? 4, that's probably about right. 5, we're on the edge. 7, well, some of them are going their own or they're failing, right? So if you have a department of 50 product managers, I think there's a reasonable expectation about 2 levels, right? Or maybe 2.5 or 3. If you have 4 product managers, well, we certainly don't need 3 levels. But I think this is management fiction. This is MBA fiction that we're overmanaged in the middle. There's real work to do at every level. And when you throw out those folks, now suddenly we have every individual contributor trying to merchandise themselves to the execs and trying to negotiate with stakeholders that are senior to them, and trying to remember to tell the whole company why we're any good. And we have real work to do at every level. And so the idea that because some investors want to extract some extra money this year by firing a bunch of middle managers, I think that's the wrong place to start. Right? One wants to look at the organization and say, do we need these people? What are they doing? Is it valuable? But no, I think old days, new days, that's a fake comparison.
Gotcha. And I think going to some of your earlier comments about enterprise politics and kind of the SaaS driven product being at the core, do you find coaching leaders changes drastically depending on the size of the company and the product itself?
Yes, I would say all enterprise products are basically the same. And all consumer, I mean, they're not, right? And all consumer products are different from enterprise, but they're the same as each other. So I think that the big swings are, where are you on the, what's your average sales price? $5, $500, $500,000. And how big is the company? Because there's lots of challenges as companies get big. Communications falls aside, all the details are lost. You need a lot more leadership in your leaders at a bigger company, because communications are so much more difficult and everybody just gets a fraction. But I think fundamentally it's the same. It's a matter of scale.
So it is easier to go enterprise to enterprise, consumer to consumer if you're helping fill a role, as you mentioned, a former CPO. They can
Yeah,
kind of slot in a bit easier.
yeah. If we look at all the really important, famous people out there from the consumer space who are talking about product management, and you know who they are, almost none of those rules apply directly to any enterprise company. Right? It's much more rational. It's much more researchy. It's much more analytical, right? And there isn't a huge sales team, which, by the way, every salesperson makes twice what a product manager makes if they hit their number, right? Sales is the thing that makes this different. And the enterprise space, sales is the most important organization per the CEO and the board. And so the idea that product folks are going to tell salespeople that they're not going to get what they want is naive.
It's interesting because I've read a few books and talked to friends, and then we commiserate that, like, oh, my company isn't like this company, and this theoretical product management style, and I think a lot of that is to do with what you just said, is that, like, if you're in an enterprise company, you're not going to have the utopian view of product management where
Right.
that you would have in a
That's
SaaS
right.
based product.
And I get, I teach a training course just for CPOs and VPs, right? And we all have the same issues regardless of the company. But if we sort ourselves consumer versus enterprise, the flavor is a bit different, right? The politics is different, the organization's different, the pressures are different. They're similar, but the B2C, the consumer stuff is much more likely to look like the generic things you see in class and books.
And so, having not read any books or things targeted at enterprise product, do they exist?
Well, one of us has been doing blogging on the space now for 23 years. And every piece I write is either for enterprise CPOs or for them to forward on to the rest of their executive team. So what I'd say is there's not a lot. Daniel Elizalde covers the space. Steve Johnson covers this. There's a few, but almost everything that comes out feels to me generically consumer. And therefore, most of the folks I work with can't apply those rules directly. They can only cherry pick. Enterprise companies will never look like Spotify. No matter how many times we read that paper from 2012, which, by the way, Spotify doesn't follow that model much anyway either, and didn't at the time. But there's a lot of cherry picking and sort of success regurgitation here from people who've done it once well or twice well, thinking that it's a general case. And I haven't seen the general case.
Yeah, and for anyone that hasn't read Rich's blog, I was reading and sharing some articles before this, and we were chatting before, and it was like he was over my shoulder in an enterprise environment. So really well written to kind of capture exactly the pain that sometimes you go through as product, and some very good tips and kind of ways of adapting.
Yeah, and these come right out of the headlines. So if I've had the very same discussion with 5 enterprise chief product officers in the last 2 weeks, I know it's a real thing, and then we're going to write about it. It's not theory, it's not imagination. It's here's the things that my coachees and I experience every single day, and here's what we might do about it.
So there's a question from Ali here. It's around kind of AI changing product management, and I'm going to frame it under the leadership umbrella. Like, do you think AI will definitely change product management? How will it change leadership in the product org?
I think that's a really slow burn. I think there's nothing in the AI stack that's going to change product leadership in the next 3 years. Um, I think we might ask a better question, right? Which is, in our product portfolios, where are the best places to apply various AI tools so that we can build better products and make people happier and make more money, right? I don't actually believe that AI is going to replace product managers, right? I think there are places and tools that are going to be useful. If you find some, Chat GPT helps you write user stories, great, but they better be the right user stories and not hallucinations from somebody else's thing, right? Um, what I'd say is, by the way, I worked on some AI stuff in the 70s. Okay, so for those of us with long memories, we've been seeing this coming for 50 years, and pieces of it are here and pieces of it are not, but it's not new. What's new is that it's getting good enough to finally maybe start using it, right? And we have to ask product questions first. Will this serve our users better than the other thing we were going to do? Right? Can we write the query ourselves? Do we need AI help? Right? Can we answer the question ourselves? Do we need AI help? And you apply first the user view. Is the tool good enough to actually improve what we're delivering? I put a piece out a few months ago I called AI washing. Right? It's like greenwashing or whatever. Every company I've talked to in the last year is shipping some kind of AI thing because their board said they had to, because valuations are higher for companies that say they're shipping AI. Most of it is zero or negative value to their actual end users. And they're going to abandon that when they figure it out, but they'll have met the goal that the board wanted to say something about AI in the quarterly meeting, right? Like all tech, if we look at the iPhone, which launched what, 2008, right? The iPad, everybody overestimated its impact in the first 3 years, and everybody underestimated its impact in the first 10 years, right? We've seen this with every technology. So I think AI is going to change the world, but I don't actually think it's going to change the world this year. And from a leadership point of view, you ask exactly the same questions. We can only invest in 4 or 5 big things this quarter. Is this AI fever dream of yours sufficiently important and big and likely to lead to value that we should push aside the other things on our roadmap, which we're pretty sure are going to be useful, right? It's a comparison question. We're using the exclusive or operator, not I'm excited about AI and here's some tools and it's going to be fun, right? This is business. This is serious. And so we're going to have to say no to 95% of all of our AI suggestions. So we better think about what they're worth and how they're going to fit in, instead of, just being excited by reading what we read in the paper.
So, kind of one of my last questions is around individual senior track and kind of
Sure.
CPO director track.
Yep.
Do you advise people to kind of bounce back and forth to kind of ladder up, or once you start managing people, stay in that stream? And I think that both are evolving as the product
Yeah.
profession is evolving.
Um, First, I'd say really good companies have a senior individual contributor track, distinguished product manager, whatever it is, right? Most companies don't yet. We're still seeing that arriving. I think it's really a question you ask yourself, which is which of those two things is going to make me happier? Which of those two things do my skills match against? What do I want to be doing? Because I think once you move up into the management chain, if you hate it, you can demote yourself, but you can't do that twice, right? So if you really don't like the politics and if you really don't like the committee work and you really don't like interviewing people and designing org charts and negotiating with stakeholders and fighting for budgets and spending a lot of time merchandising all the good things we do instead of doing product management, then you want to be in the distinguished product manager track because that's the thing that you love and is going to make you happy. Um, uh, and it's a better fit for some people than others, right? I don't know what somebody should want. I just know what they tell me. And once you move up into the management ranks, if you move back down again, a lot of people will see that as failing to succeed. So somebody who was a director, move them back to IC a couple of times. I don't want to move them back up to director because I assume they didn't want the job they were in.
So on the failing to succeed piece, I've often heard that tenure can be a challenge when you start going up higher and higher.
Mhm.
And is that something that is just part of the job that like you just hope for your 18 months and you kind of got to move on to the next thing? Or is there something that you found advice that you can give to people and say, well, this is how kind of to survive as an executive?
Yeah. Um, it's a really hard job, like all other jobs, but it's a specifically hard job, and a lot of people aren't cut out for it. I think having an outside coach is really good. Having some training is good. All on the soft skills, all on the negotiating skills, all on the organizational stuff. If you come up through the product track, you know how to do product management, but you don't know how to be an executive. And so the failure modes I see aren't that I'm not good enough as a product manager or a product leader or a product strategist. It's that I don't know how to be a leader. I don't know how to motivate my teams and merchandise my wins and get budget for things, right? So again, part of that's personal choice, part of that's skills, but nobody's born into that job. You do it for a while and you decide if it's a fit for you, and if you're good at it, they move you up, right? If not, you go to some startup where you can be the CPO, but also the product manager because there's only 11 people and you're everything.
Said I think the coaching thing is relevant because sometimes I think we think I've been 20 years experience, I know what I'm doing, and clearly
Right.
this is a major shift.
Sure. Right. And just to highlight that for a moment, and then we'll go to the questions. It's not about being smart, right? Everybody in engineering and product is trained to believe that smart is the answer. No, it's all the EQ, it's the people skills, it's the negotiating, it's understanding how folks think, it's appreciating the different incentives across the organization, it's building bridges, it's making friends, it's helping other people when you don't have to, so that when you need help, they're there for you, right? It's all of the outbound people and emotional skills that often we lack because we've come up in a place where being right is the answer. And of course, we want to be right, but you can't just be right. You can't get there without bringing everybody along with you.
Well said. So now as we wrap up, I always ask. I know you've brought up a few books, and I'll try to get them into the show notes
Mhm.
and some of your articles, but um, so I always ask for tips and resources right at the end of the episode. So
Sure.
any books, articles, anything like that, and then any tips around like what can someone do today to help make this jump?
Right. So I point everybody toward Teresa Torres's book on continuous discovery because I think she's the smartest person on the planet here. Josh Seiden's a good one. Ron Lichty has a book called Managing the Unmanageable, which is about the engineering side of this, right? The one thing I'd say that's the real tip if you want to move up, there's a conversation you have to have with your immediate boss. Okay, so I'm an IC and I'm working for a group product manager or a director, and I want a job like that. You can't not have the conversation with your boss. You can't go around them and gun for their job. You can't look for other champions. If they're not supporting you, you're not getting promoted. And there's a polite way to do that. And the polite way is you go to your boss and you say, I I really think I would be good at a job like yours. I'm not trying to take your job away from you. I'd really love your support for moving up into a job like yours or at your level. And I want two kinds of feedback. One is tell me what you see I need to do or improve or skills I need to have that you think might be necessary along the journey. And then as positions open up, I really want your help to propose me as a candidate for those jobs. Right. And you have to be honest and humble when you do that, because if your boss figures out that you're going around them to take their job, yours is the next one gone. Right. That's not a success path. So we have to be an organization where there's opportunities to advance, and we have to be working for somebody who's actually looking out for our best interest, or it's never going to happen.
And as we wrap up, I'll just do one last question. Anyone can ask a question through the chat. This last one's going to be about leadership in a remote world.
Okay.
Do you feel like there's anything that is different in the last 5 years as companies go remote first about managing in leadership, and
Yeah.
how to get promoted into leadership? Or is the fastest track to leadership live in Silicon Valley and Mountain View, and you will be around the leadership roles?
I think the trap here is companies that are partly remote. So in a company where most of the execs actually meet in person, and let's say the product folks don't, um, you're in a really, really tenuous situation. If everybody's remote, I think the culture will support the kinds of things you need. Now, again, because the work we do is a little hard to explain and nobody cares about it and it's hard to measure, you have to merchandise your successes, and your boss has to merchandise your successes all the time so that you can be seen as successful, not just being successful. But if it's a fully remote organization, I think it's less challenging. If it's a fully on-site, it's less challenging. I don't think you can do the product job if you're remote and your team is local, or if you as a product leader are remote and the rest of the executive team is local. I think that just doesn't work because it ignores all of the people issues and all of the knowledge and respect and understanding that comes from being in one mode or the other. The idea that companies are going to bring half of their people back and leave the other half remote, I don't even know what that means.
Well said. So yeah, for all our guests today, if you like the episode, be sure to like it or subscribe on YouTube or any of the other platforms that I mentioned, and comment with ideas for future episodes. Thanks to whoever it was that recommended Rich for this episode a couple months back. It was great having him on. And if you're looking for content about the job search, I have Steve Dalton coming in on the 21st of February. Steve is the author of the 2 Hour Job Search. So um, that's going to be kind of how strategies around job searching. Steve is a former Duke career strategist, and he's employing a lot of his tactics he learned at Duke in that role, and helping people find jobs by using a framework as opposed to kind of just haphazardly. So if you're interested in that, tune in on February 21st. And with that said, I'll give Rich the last word. Do you have anything to say to the audience as we wrap up?
I'd say, um, if you're in product management, it better be because you love it, right? Really, really smart people do product management for a little while, and then they go do something easier that pays twice as much. I'm obviously not that smart because I'm decades in, but I think we have to bring our hearts and our souls to the office. We have to love our products the way we love our children. We have to love our users the way we love our children, because it's really hard work if you think it's just a job. There's easier things, and most people are going to do something else.
All right. Well, with that said, I will wrap it up